You can also connect directly to fertile business ecosystems, including cloud and IT services, financial services, and enterprise. Once you're inside SC3, you'll immediately understand the Equinix difference. We've installed layer after layer of state-of-the-art security. Our intelligent upside-down design places the cable trays overhead for much easier access. And our remarkably efficient cage configurations put the point of demarcation within easy reach. Just plug in and you're done. Every Equinix facility in the world delivers reliability like you wouldn't believe, to the tune of 5 nines uptime. In other words, we're always on. We even staff our sites around the clock with engineers. Use them for scheduled or emergency work. They're always there, always. And whenever you need to spend time in the building, we've made it a very comfortable place to be, with everything from quiet meeting rooms to a break room to spare parts and loaner tools. When you partner with Equinix, you get much more than just an airtight place to house your data. You get a competitive edge. With a global reach that gives you better performance. With a carrier-neutral environment that gives you more choice. And with a robust ecosystem that gives you unprecedented access to your customers, partners, and target markets. Welcome to Equinix, global data centers to accelerate business growth, today and tomorrow.
Welcome. Testing. Welcome. We have some additional seating available in front, so feel free to make yourself at home. Just a few more seats in the front row. If you're standing and would like a seat, feel free to come on down.
Your business is growing, and your IT needs are growing too. Do you have a partner?
How's everyone doing? You guys ready for the movie? It's so if we finish early, we've promised to reenact Godzilla.
Yeah. Where's AWS?
Scene by scene.
So my name is Jason Alinen. I'm the founder of Northwest Tech Alliance. Just want to thank you guys all for coming out. Exits right here if something happens, as far as earthquake or something crazy. Hopefully not, but there you go. I don't think there's a second exit, so maybe back there. So just, don't push and shove. So we just want to thank you guys for coming. Really look forward to hearing from these panelists and seeing, what's going on in the multi-cloud future. Obviously, it's here. Hybrid being kind of the dominant kind of conversation over the past year for NWTA, but now we'll see where things go with multi. I think it's gonna be fun. I want to introduce the moderator here, is a friend of mine, Jeff Dickey. He's the SVP of Cloud Operations at Redapt, and inspired me really to create NWTA in his little side project called Nextcast, where he interviews executives in our area. Posted him on my Facebook page recently if you want to see some of the really awesome interviews that he's done. And just love to see what he does there and his passion. But obviously, we all do need to be profitable. And I think that cloud, if anybody's in that, this is the next gold mine. First, it was the Klondike Gold Rush, and now we got cloud as the next gold for everything. So if you're in this business, you're probably going to be living in Medina soon, which is great. Hopefully I'm next to you. So Jeff, let's see if we could put his lower third up there. We got that, Adrian? There it is. Beautiful. All right, so hand the mic to Jeff.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. So first, I'd like to start off introducing the panel here. I've got just super excited to have these folks here, hand-picked panel. So kick it off, Nikesh.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. So Nikesh Kalra, I'm with Equinix, and I'm responsible for all of our vertical marketing related to our cloud and IT services business.
Great.
Hi, I'm Mark Williams. I'm the CTO of Redapt. My primary function at Redapt is to engage with customers who are building clouds, help them define their cloud strategy. Only been at Redapt for about a year and a half. Prior to that, I was a big customer of Redapt at Zynga. At Zynga, I was responsible for all the infrastructure operations, taking them from private data center, non-cloud infrastructure, growing wildly into Amazon, and then ultimately building a private cloud where we pivoted all of our infrastructure back out. So I've actually worked with all of these comrades up here, so thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Go ahead, Bailey.
Hi, I'm Bailey Caldwell. I'm the VP of Customer Success at Rightscale. We're a cloud portfolio management software company. It's a new acronym we're trying to introduce. Our marketing team feels compelled to always create some differentiation. But we've been doing this since Amazon launched. So as Mark mentioned, I'm working with companies like Zynga, doing hybrid cloud, enterprises all around the world. Certainly looking forward to answering questions and glad to be here.
That's awesome. Thanks.
Oh, sorry about that. My name is Ovi Burrow. I'm a senior solution architect with Datapipe. Datapipe is a managed hosting provider headquartered out of Jersey City. My role is I'm really responsible for helping customers figure out their migration to the cloud, if it's public, private, hybrid cloud mixes, and I'm really there to help them with the solution and with their cloud strategy.
That's great. Thank you, guys. So just level set, I'm assuming that everyone is very comfortable and has an understanding of cloud. What about multi-cloud? Does everyone have kind of an understanding of multi-cloud? Can you show your hands if you kind of understand or a little bit of multi-cloud? Anyone have cloud applications running themselves right now? A few? Good. And how many, as far as technical folks, do we have technical folks here? How about line of business folks? Couple? Oh, more. Okay, awesome. Okay, great. So just to level set, we're going to kind of open it up with the first question, which is what is multi-cloud? And just want to hear the perspective from each panelist. So go ahead.
Sure. I'm almost curious to know if we did that survey all over again, if the question was, do you have email on your mobile device? And are you using Dropbox? And are you using some other app? Because then the answer of are you using multi-cloud is you've already been doing it, right? So I think very simply put, multi-cloud is self-explanatory. It's being able to use multiple clouds for different applications or different services. I think the nuances that we'll probably dig into today are actually how do you effectively manage across these, create consistency and more efficiency for a variety of users, not just an individual user. But again, going back to the root question, it's pushing more of your IT applications or even personal applications out of your own premise or your own device and into somebody else's premise.
Okay. So if I have a VMware infrastructure in Salesforce.com, is that multi-cloud?
Not necessarily. VMware infrastructure could live anywhere. So that's where I think we get into the details of, is this on your premise? Is it in one of my facilities? Is it in somebody else's facility? Where is it actually living? Because cloud doesn't necessarily, virtualization does not equal cloud. It could be a subset of it, but it doesn't have to be. So I think that it's much more nuanced than just saying, am I doing this or that? It really needs to kind of you need to peel the onion back a bit more.
Okay. Anyone else have comments on that?
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think kind of from a pragmatist's, implementation perspective, a multi-cloud would be any two clouds from which you can aim yourself at an interface, whether a web or an API, and orchestrate any kind of compute, storage, or network, even one of those across two different locations. I'd even go as far to say that even if you've implemented two identical clouds, whether you've consumed two public cloud services, both from Datapipe or Amazon, or even if you're doing it with the same provider in different regions, I consider that multi-cloud because there will always be differences based on what you're trying to do and what the ideal capabilities of that particular cloud are.
Yeah, I would add to that. When we first started with Amazon, we viewed each region as a cloud, essentially, because they were disparate infrastructure services. They still are today. And there's different levels of service in each location. So I think that the origination from our standpoint of multi-cloud was actually the use and proliferation of infrastructure as a service, almost regardless of the form. In terms of definition of what really cloud is, I think it's about agility and software-defined infrastructure. So is there an API? Can I create and spin up resources on demand? And that's really the revolution that cloud represents. It's not so much whether it's VMware or Amazon, it's not which technology it is can I enable on-demand resources for the use of my business or my end users?
Right. So multi-cloud is also about evolving your application. So evolving your application to be, if it's going to be active-active, or you're going to have a globally low balance site or application where you can service users all over. I'm kind of last one in here coming in. So, they were all pretty much hit it on the head. Cloud is really about being able to access the physical layer. So the abstraction of storage, of networking, of compute through an API, and being able to manipulate those resources and deploy them and automate them across multiple clouds.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So I think everyone heard hybrid cloud for quite a while, and we've rapidly gone into this multi-cloud. Why are we headed in this multi-cloud direction?
Well, I think we're already there, right? It's again, if you look at the consumerization of or consider the consumerization of IT. I mean, the reference point that I gave earlier, you have your iPad here, I've got my iPhone, everybody's got these devices. The fact that there's multiple apps, that our data is not necessarily resident here, and the application that we're using is being driven from somewhere else, that is now making its way into the IT organization of enterprises, or even just the daily operations of the SMB market. So I think where we were headed in the conversation down the line here is that it's not necessarily about the fact that we're using multiple clouds. It's actually how do we orchestrate across them? How do we create efficiencies? Create consistent policies, et cetera. It's more of the effective utilization across multiple clouds, not the fact that, and I think what's happened is it's become a challenge. That's why we're talking about it. I think there's a realization that this is already happening. The trend is here. It's not that something specifically had to be done to get us there. Now it's about how do we control it. If I'm a CIO specifically, but more across all ITs, how do I take most advantage of it? What are the security risks, et cetera, et cetera?
So, sorry, I had a follow-up point on that. And if you think about it, we have this slide in our kind of corporate deck, so I'm not trying to give a sales speech, but data center consolidation, late 90s, global networks, the ability to consolidate IT resources, hub and spoke stuff led to virtualization, which was how do I optimize my resources and get higher consumption or utilization rates. That led to the cloud, which is really that agility phase of front-facing that infrastructure with an API. You now hear about brokerage services, which is the point you were making. How do I control? Now that I can do this, okay, it's great. It's awesome that I can swipe a credit card and use Amazon. That creates a major challenge from a business operations perspective. So this control phase is where you're starting to see things like brokerage. Our view is that's already here, and people are trying to solve for those problems that exist today. The next step is really about how do I have my infrastructure learn about how it's running, apply those analytics to the infrastructure, and make decisions on its own. It's a really interesting concept, sort of like Skynet. How will services be launched automatically on the basis of performance profiles or business requirements, I think is the next phase we're moving into.
Bailey, what are some good examples, some use case examples for that?
Well, I mean, let's start with just the reality of today that we see within every enterprise we walk into. They have Amazon, whether they like it or not, because the business units have gone out from either developers or marketing teams have gone out and started using AWS. They have data centers, and there's a major gap between data center, ground up infrastructure and application down realities of cloud. So they're trying to reconcile those two worlds. So just, we did a state of the cloud report earlier this year. About 1,000 respondents, 74% of them said that hybrid cloud is here today and is a reality for their business. Just a quick side note, it's really a AWS, VMware, and Azure sort of pivot point within those enterprises. We certainly see OpenStack and CloudStack and other desires, but ultimately that's the reality of their IT environment today. So whether you're Samsung, who's a massive AWS user, like Zynga was, trying to get better price control, or you're a 3M who has HIPAA compliant applications you need to run into a data center and you're going to choose OpenStack. I mean, the use cases are all over the map, and a lot of it ties, we could talk for a whole hour about governance, right? The fact that my data needs to live in country because I'm storing information about my consumers. So the use cases are endless.
I'm going to throw in one add-on point there, which is, do you remember when we used to use Windows file trees? And you would store your music in one folder, your photos in another folder. You had to remember how they were named. And fortunately, you might have had one search interface, the Windows search bar. If you have a mobile device right now and you've got iCloud, Google Drive, Dropbox, Box, BitCasa, that's just 5 storage applications there. How do I know where the hell I put anything anymore? Right. That's a perfect example of a multi-cloud problem that needs to get solved for a consumer. You can imagine what it's like for an IT department for corporate needs and then trying to wrangle in what their individual users are actually doing. So I think that really touches on Bailey's point about how do you get visibility and management across all of these things. So that actually is one of the burning challenges, multi-cloud.
Yeah, I think another way to kind of answer this question is less from a technology difference point of view, but really what this enables a business to do. And I think that's around being able to leverage vendors for cost, right? So you saw what happened April 1st with Amazon and Google battling it on the price war. So having the capability and the malleability in how you deploy or consume infrastructure gives you the ability to take advantage of those marketplace use cases as they're tangibly meaningful to the bottom line. The other one too is, private cloud versus public cloud. Again, another way to dial into specific performance requirements that you may have for your infrastructure, or to solve what may be possible performance-wise but very costly from a public provider. Just again, having that ability to shape your cost structure, even to the point, and this was actually one of the things that was a catalyst at Zynga, was the company at the time, pre-IPO, was consuming a lot of Amazon, had some legacy kind of data center specific infrastructure, but as a pre-IPO company, there was some sensitivity to how much OpEx versus CapEx there was. So there was actually some interest in spending more capital. Zynga had some capital, and that was one of the catalysts that actually helped us move quickly on private clouds, because it would have an impact, a desirable impact on how that reflected on the balance sheet. So very different way to look at use case there, but relevant.
What are some of the challenges you're seeing in those use cases?
Well, certainly having to acquire domain-specific knowledge of each of the different good and bad parameters or performance capabilities of each cloud is one thing that'll just, it takes time. There are use cases I've seen from the technological, a marketing pitch around a particular use case for multi-cloud that doesn't necessarily make sense from an operational point of view. So one example of that is own the base, rent the spike. I think that's great when, and if we're talking about deploying one application in that way, I think that's great for when that one application doesn't necessarily get impacted by the way the user experiences the performance of that application. So gaming being my experience. That own the base, rent the spike, deploying one game was actually a bad use case. We actually did that. We did with Rightscale and zCloud and Amazon. We actually deployed it that way, but we pulled back from that very quickly because we realized how complex an environment that was. Operationally, to have two completely different environments tied together, there's a lot more moving parts, a lot more things to know, a lot of differences in the performance capabilities of those two different infrastructures. So multi-cloud is great for one workload here, a different workload here, or if you don't care about user performance and there's flexibility and things going anomalous, you can blend them.
So you've talked,
well, I mean, I think you asked a little bit about what some of the challenges are. I think one that is always overlooked is culture and skill set. So I was talking to a really large printer manufacturer last week, and they were telling me about their private cloud, and I said, okay, now we're in the conversation, or 40 minutes. So if I'm an end user of your private cloud and I need 10 VMs, how long does that take? And they kind of pause, look around the room, and they go, well, it's about 3.5 weeks. Well, the problem with that is that you may have all the technology to provision that VM, but you haven't given a self-service interface to your customer, or you haven't given a way to interface directly with that infrastructure. So it's a ticket, it goes to their ITIL 3.0 awesome IT process, and it goes through 6 approvals. So the cultural requirements for larger enterprises are really one of the biggest gating factors in the industry we see. I mean, it's awesome that you, as a startup, if you can go, with a credit card and a dream and spin up servers on Amazon, and you have the technical ability to do that. If you're a company of any size and you have any kind of a scale, you're going to have a challenge with skill set, process, and organizational models that are yet to be solved.
what about, where does it not fit? Where's multi-cloud not a good fit? Is there a use case you can think of?
I think to do it just for the sake of doing it is a bad fit. I mean, I've seen a lot of customers want to have infinite interoperability. And again, because I have a disproportionately weighted operational priority in the way I think about clouds, you really do want to have how you consume infrastructure be relatively simple. Again, I mentioned the use case of multi-cloud with one application across multiple disparate infrastructures. That's kind of an operational daredevil-ish thing to do. But I think there's some great ways to kind of get started. Like if you haven't done anything with multi-cloud so far, getting started with at least doing maybe storage in one public cloud would be a great way to start, and then be able to pivot from there to getting more and more comfortable with those different use cases that are relevant for your business. So.
Yeah, I mean, just really short, I don't think there's a use case where it doesn't apply, because you have to separate the technology from the business outcome you're trying to get with cloud, which is agility, speed, the days of racking and stacking servers. How do you get your business away from that? So it could be a completely internet disconnected data center with a cloud delivery model for your business. So I don't think that there is a case where it doesn't apply.
I would say that there's, that's a loaded question. So I think all of the answers that have been presented, the responses that have been presented so far are actually very appropriate. But it's like saying, where does IT not apply, right? So, technology applies everywhere. I think where you run into problems, we've highlighted some, but one would be if you're doing it just for the sake of doing it, when you're in the cloud, the network is one of the major bottlenecks and gating factors to the user experience, to performance, to whether cloud is usable, accessible, et cetera, or not. And if you don't think about network, or if you don't consider the network ahead of time, then it may not be, your experience will be poor. Or if you do, you may find that it may not be appropriate to use different types of cloud services based upon what that network performance is going to be like, where it is. It's like you were saying earlier, Bailey was saying that Amazon is like a bunch of different individual clouds put together, so and not all services are available everywhere. So based upon the network considerations, you may decide that multi-cloud is not appropriate at that time. So I don't think you can unbundle cloud period from network. And I think it becomes compounded when you go into multi-cloud.
Yeah, you're mentioning network kind of made me think of one of the other kind of gotchas. It's not a bad use case, but one of the things that can happen through multi-cloud is wherever your data starts to accumulate becomes a significant gravity well, and it's hard once it's accumulated there to move it somewhere else. So I think the future of multi-cloud is actually going to influence the interoperability and portability of the applications that can process data more than solving that purely with network. I mean, there's not enough network ever to move multi-petabytes of data in meaningful time frames to pull that back in. So being very cautious with how sticky you can get with where your data lands is another kind of caution.
We're actually good with that. Exactly.
So what about the typical ingredients that go into making multi-cloud work? Ovi, you have any?
Yes. So, I mean, typical ingredients are going to be, of course, API. So you want to be able to interface with something where you can manage those resources across multiple clouds. There's also going to be scripting, right? So we need scripts to actually deploy, packages and specific configurations and things of that nature. Another thing is templates, right? So to have a consistent deployment across all my environments, I need to have server templates. So these server templates could be, let's say, a version of RHEL, 5.6, and then it contains, these package updates and things like that. So I think those are really some of the core ingredients that are needed. So APIs, you need server templates, you need scriptings, really to kind of bring this all together and make it all work.
So just to add on that, cloud portfolio management in our world is that centerpiece is the cloud management bit where you have the API, you provision architectures and stacks. You can build this all by yourself. You just copy Rightscale. It only takes 7 years. And on the left side of that, you have a self-service portal, which also has an API, but gives developers easy access into that infrastructure, gives IT a way to control and optimize and govern what's being run and deployed. And we haven't talked about this much, but it's a really interesting topic. The cloud analytics part, which is in our platform financially driven. So that's what tells you what you're spending and where you spent it, both private and public or multi-cloud, and what you think you're going to spend in the future based on building a scenario. And the reason those products exist is actually because our install base said, well, first of all, they started building their own self-service portal, and we said, well, that's a good idea, let's do it. Second of all, especially when you get an enterprise, CapEx versus OpEx balance is really tricky. I mean, most companies have 80% of their dollars tied up into CapEx. Well, the cloud is a bad thing for that because they want to fix costs. So if you have a way to get more predictive on an elastic infrastructure with a solution like a cost analytics engine, it lets you calculate and forecast more accurately. So I think those three kind of top-level business drivers are some of the barriers as well.
I've got 4 ingredients, and one of them Bailey just mentioned, which is the transparency to cost. So having had to experience what it was like to build new clouds or make available public clouds that effectively were elastic to my customers, And then to have to encourage them to move to the private cloud that I spent a lot of money on was actually a very hard problem to solve. And so one of the key factors in solving that problem was showing back what the fees or the costs relating to consumption of this cloud, this non-cloud, and this new private cloud were. And in fact, you, as the business owner, as the CIO, you can actually make those costs whatever you want, because those costs have to reflect the cost to your business or your department and what it takes to own and operate those different infrastructures. So in my case, we had built private cloud because it was a third the cost of what we were doing in public cloud and more performant. So that was actually the way we were able to manipulate movement of workloads out of everybody being happy in Amazon at the time. The three other things I'd mention are abstraction. So being multi-cloud, let me actually start with this other one, automation. If you're not already automating, if you're automating a ticket that asks a human to go do something, that's not automation. You have to be religious with automating every step it takes to deploy your application. If you're not doing that, cloud is like going to be, I'm going to quote Jeff here, virtualization 2.0, and it's you're just moving the problem, right? You need to be, the cloud is there to enable you to recoup your investment in the time it takes humans to do things. So automate something and then begin iterating from there. Abstracting, so having multiple clouds involved requires that the automation you build be malleable between clouds that you know you're going to operate against and future ones that you don't. So keeping things simple, using tools that are designed for multi-cloud, for example, and not over-consuming, and this is the third thing, vendor lock-in components. So one example of that would be database as a service. That's going to be proprietary to where you implement it in a public cloud versus what products you might be able to implement in your private cloud. You're not going to be able to make your data truly portable. Drag and drop is the promise, but it's not there. You got to be very careful with how prescriptive you are and how you select the components you're going to use across your clouds.
What about you? Do you have some typical ingredients?
I think they've said it. They've said it all. I mean, the only overarching comment I would make on that is consider at the root of all this is data, right? What data do I have? What data am I going to have? What data do I want to have? Where do I want to put it? Who's using it? Why are they using it? What are the applications that are running on it? That will determine how you architect the rest of the system.
That's great. Next one is around security. So, do we need to change?
Can I have a drink, please?
Yes. Drink break.
I meant cocktails.
They do, yeah. Can we order some from here? So do we have to rethink security for multi-cloud, or is it the same? Is it just kind of status quo?
I don't think that the approach to security is going to change much. It's the same thing as if I have a single cloud, right? I have to look at the data center where I'm storing my data at. Is it physically secure? Is it certified for ISO 27001, SSA 16, PCI level 1, things like that? And then you have to figure out, again, the data is just the data, right? We all feel safe when the data's in our data center because it's in our little bubble and we feel safe with it, right? But when you start storing things in the cloud or multi-cloud, you have to take into consideration how you're going to protect that data. So data at rest, how are you going to encrypt that data at rest? What are you going to do for data in transit, data in flight? Are you using, secure sockets? You have to really do what you've been doing, but take those same practices and apply it to the multi-cloud environment.
Yeah, so I would add to that in the survey I mentioned earlier, we did it the last 2 years in a row, and we had a whole section on security and governance and what are the big obstacles or challenges for enterprises. And what's interesting, it's actually pretty simple when you think about it. Those companies who've been using cloud longer have a diminished sense of security concern. Governance is still static, almost regardless of the amount that you use it. And I think that's because of the increased regulatory requirements that we're seeing. Thank you to the NSA and other things. But ultimately, the point is there are techniques now that didn't exist several years ago to deal with security in a multi-cloud world. You have to do it right. You have to have all the right practices that surround it. But there's a lot of innovative startups helping to solve the problems in this space. But I would agree with you. It's sometimes back to basics and how you operate it.
Yeah, I think that security is less a technology than a process. So, Ovi, I think you were saying exactly that it's there are certainly technologies that are minimum critical, but it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. So the process is around understanding your vulnerabilities, prioritizing those risks, and choosing how much you can invest in mitigating those, and then starting over again. So I think some of the ways that you approach that problem are really around understanding what your vulnerabilities are, logging everything, and that ties into some of the other things that are, I think, making it more accommodating for public cloud consumption anyway, which is the visibility, the transparency, the auditability. Again, back to, if you automate everything, then you can show the auditor that which you've automated and you can validate against it. You should be logging everything. You can then show them, look, there's been no change. If you're rigorous with all of those practices, your ability to deploy applications across multiple clouds is really consistent because the way you operate across multiple clouds is consistent.
Yeah, I think the key word that keeps coming up is consistency. And it's not just consistency across the board, but it's consistency as appropriate for the data or application that's in question. The analogy might be literally my money, right? I have money in a checking account, a savings account, a brokerage account, a 401k account. I call it savings plan in my wallet, on my iPhone. I have, and the money may have a single source, but it has different purposes, different time horizons, different applications, et cetera. I don't necessarily have the same exact set of policies across all of those different accounts, but I need to know that they're safe. I have some minimum standards, like Ovi was saying about, certifications that all of those accounts need to have, and then based upon what I'm doing with those and how I access them. I think visibility is actually really critical here. I need to know at any given time exactly where my money is, who's got access to it, that I've got access to it, and where it's available, et cetera. So, those are kind of the general parameters to think about.
Yeah, I'll just add on the visibility thing. I mean, that's having been a consumer of both public and private, there's an incredible amount of value in knowing everything down to the last component of an infrastructure, which you can do in private data center infrastructure, which you can't do in public. There's only so much transparency any public cloud provider is going to share with you about when they're making changes, what's happening with the neighbor instances on your node or your top of rack switch or other points of contention in that infrastructure. All of those things can matter in a security context, like is somebody making malicious change? Well, so far you've not really heard of any of the public cloud providers having such a breach, right? There's been no fundamental gross negligent flaws or bad practices out there, and I think that combined with the price keeps going down has relaxed a lot of the security fears, and money talks. So I think that's why at least there's been a dramatic shift and more increased comfort with the public cloud consumption as it relates to security.
Which makes you wonder, at some point way down the road, does this start looking like, or just start asking to be a regulated market? So,
well, it is a regulated market. I mean, you look at I can't remember what the SAE 16 or whatever the SAS 70 is now. Like all of those standards, like you look at what you have to sign up for as a public cloud provider, it is regulated. So you still have to do your own due diligence to validate. Okay, demonstrate to me, or read the summary reports or whatever it is to be comfortable with that. But it is super regulated, and then IT itself is regulated. Thank you, Sarbanes-Oxley, and all that fun stuff. So nobody trusts anybody anymore.
I just want some of his money.
So staying on the security topic, so from trying to be like an outsider here, listening in, everything I read, it says that cloud computing, like the number one issue is security, the number one fear, number one kind of barrier to getting over that. Ovi as a cloud provider, and Bailey as kind of working closely with Amazon for so many years. Do you guys have any, what are your thoughts on that?
In terms of how do you get over your fears? How much time do we have?
Well, didn't the Rightscale report show that security is no longer the number one topic?
It is.
The last 2 years, right?
Well, last year over this year, it's no longer number one. What's number one is governance, and security is part of that, but it's the macro view. So governance is more, all the other business controls you need to have in place, because it's not just a breach that's going to expose you to some compliance requirement. I think it's a process of maturity, and it's a process of understanding that all the good work that's been done in the data center, the bubble as you described it, Ovi, can be applied to the method that you use in multi-cloud. I love the way you describe it, Mark, in terms of having a consistent operating model. That's ultimately how you diminish your risk, and that's really what security's there to do. I mean, look, if it needed to be 1,000% secure, we wouldn't use the internet, period. So I think that it's that balance, and each business is going to be different and have their own set of requirements around not just their own model, but what applications they're running and how they're being used.
I think just knowing what happened, like count on there being a problem or a breach, figuring out quickly what happened and fixing it, unlike Target, have data and make sure that you're looking at
well,
it.
It's
Don't
amazing
just
though,
collect
think
it.
of the investment Target made in a secure system, right, that ended up getting breached anyways.
Right.
So ultimately, it's about how do you remediate and operate with those expectations. Will a cloud provider have a security breach? I'm going to say yes. Has it happened yet? Not that we know of, but I think those things are inevitable.
I think it really comes down to just not back to the basics, but really just making sure that you have those security processes in place. So things like log management, having visibility into the logs, seeing what's going on, configuration assessment, who's doing what to any of my core files, core files. So it's really, you still have to apply the same security practices that you've been doing up to this day, right? So change control. Change control is a big part of security, making sure that things are not changing without the required approval process. So it really goes down back to the basics and just taking what you've been doing already at your physical data center or in your traditional cloud and just moving that over into the multi-cloud field.
Yeah, I think the overcoming of the fear part, this really comes down to risk-reward modeling, right? The end user doesn't necessarily have many fears about using multi-cloud or using multiple cloud applications on a mobile device or on their desktop, or if their desktop exists anymore. And the chief compliance officer is at the other end of the spectrum, or the CSO is at the other end of the spectrum, and security is the utmost concern, and risk needs to be completely minimized. And somewhere in between, a CFO or somebody will not say it needs to be minimized, but it needs to be optimized, right? Which is, I need to get business done. It comes down to a financial decision. What risks am I willing to take, and how much exposure am I willing to take in order to get business done for a certain outcome? So I think that you'll start seeing more specific risk modeling being done in this area.
That's great. I want to touch on something that Bailey mentioned about the maturity model. And can you describe like where people are in the maturity model of cloud computing, where you guys kind of come in and make a good fit?
We happen to have one of these, by the way, not just from a sort of vision and strategy standpoint, but from a segmentation perspective. So there's cloud beginners, cloud watchers, kind of cloud sort of users, and then there's cloud focused. And I think those four categories can be applied to the same company, different business units within a company, or the broader market as a whole. And what's interesting about the data is if you parse those categories against things like concerns, as I mentioned earlier, cloud beginners, security is number one. Cloud focused, companies that have an intent and strategy for using cloud, it's no longer their number one concern. It's still there, but it's not the primary one. So I think that the spectrum for any individual enterprise is going to go across those. The place we're most successful is in companies that have said this cloud thing is an operating model. Right? It's not a technology, it's a way we need to run our IT organization. So how do we take advantage of all the innovation and all the price competitiveness of Google and Amazon? They're going to outspend any individual IT department by a factor that's hard to calculate in terms of the IT services they deploy. How can I use companies like Equinix, who have 99 data centers, at least last time I checked, maybe more, 101. And it's a really compelling strategy. So that's the sort of innovative IT enterprise we try to find. I will say, for those of you who are selling in this space, just side note, we're generally more successful when a business unit's pulling us into the IT organization, because there's a forcing event. A lot of IT is still very concerned about the basics of the business. Their footprint of responsibility is much broader than just this cloud thing. They're worried about mobile phones and laptops and viruses and everything else that goes into a holistic IT organization. So I think that's sort of how we see the market, and what we try to focus on is who's innovating in the space, who's bringing their business to the table, or whose business is taking IT with them to evolve and innovate in cloud.
Several of the things you mentioned kind of resonated with me personally, just as I was going through the drinking from the fire hose of growing infrastructure at Zynga. One of them was kind of that difference between that cloud beginner and what that, I can't remember the name of the top end of the
Cloud
spectrum.
focused.
Cloud focused. The biggest difference that I see in that is how much automation there is. The fact that you don't care about security as much because you've automated things. You're not dependent on humans making manual or consistently manual correct decisions or correct practices. So that actually gives a lot of people great comfort. It becomes auditable, again, when it's something you can check into a code repository. This configuration, this security group construct, this authentication interface change, all of that, everything has to be maintained in that way so that you can only look at what the changes are over time. The other thing I personally identified with in the growth of maturity through that is how comfortable I had to become in being very transparent about what my infrastructure is comprised of. I'll never forget the day the CTO and the SVP of Mafia Wars, which was a huge game for Zynga back in 2008 and 9. We were busting at the seams, and there was no room in the data center. Sorry, I needed more power than you could put in the density, but not your fault. We were in the middle of building another large pod with Equinix, and literally the CTO and the SVP wanted to see what the data center looked like. Like, they wanted to help me solve this problem of there's not enough infrastructure to grow. And so I walk them in, and they see all these spaces in the racks of servers, and they're all, well, can't you just put more servers in there? There's more ports in these top rack switches. Why can't you do more? Because I had to educate them about space and power. So this process of being transparent about what my problems are, and believe it or not, you're going to get a lot of, as you kind of create this DevOps mentality of being willing to be transparent and sharing and educating in both directions, you're going to get a lot of great ideas from that group of people. They want to solve these problems. They want to automate. They want to consume things that solve everybody's pain. So I think that all plays into how do you get up those levels of maturity. You have to be willing to share your problems, prioritize them, and be willing to listen to other people's ideas about how to solve them.
Great. It's a great story, too. I love that. It brings up another thing I want to mention, too, just kind of all of us here, we've kind of worked together in the past. We actually have things together. So Datapipe's a customer of ours. We resell their services. Rightscale is a partner of ours. We work together on many engagements. Mark came from a customer, Zynga, who was a customer of all the folks here, and Equinix is a great partner of ours, where we actually host our cloud racks there. And it's just kind of I just want to bring that up. Like, it's kind of a great group. We've been working together in the past for quite a while, and just kind of it just resonated that everyone here has kind of a common thread that we've been working together in the past.
Hey, just one point on that. I mean, I think that's one of the key issues or challenges or opportunities in multi-cloud. It's an ecosystem. I mean, you're buying into a diverse ecosystem of providers, and it's no longer I'm going to go to IBM and buy everything from IBM. I mean, there are still companies that will do that, but I think they're not necessarily seeing the future and taking advantage of all the innovation that exists. So the other question to think about is, how do I, as an enterprise or as an individual trying to sell to these companies, help people tap into this massive innovation ecosystem? Because if you don't have a model to do it, you're gonna fall behind in ways that, I mean, it's probably gonna be startling how fast it happens, to be honest with you. I mean, look at the price drops. It's okay, we did 30 in 3 years, and then it goes 30% down. I don't think that stops anytime soon. So.
Yeah, that actually, the ecosystem comment is really good, and the one self-serving thing I'll throw out there is that, one of the and I, in some ways it just kind of happened organically, but ecosystems have grown up inside Equinix over time, primarily because of the depth of our peering infrastructure. And what you highlighted this about data gravity, right? So a lot of the trend of multi-cloud and where this is going, and kind of the considerations about how we're going to take advantage of it, is really about how do you optimize getting the right set of apps close to the right set of data for the right set of users, right? And frankly, I think what we're seeing happening inside Equinix is, first of all, the first ecosystem was peering, then the next ecosystems were, financial and advertising, et cetera. And as the cloud ecosystem has grown, now it's actually a data ecosystem that's forming, right? More companies are bringing their data closer to the apps inside Equinix. Whether those apps are coming from something that sits in AWS and gets tethered into Equinix, or like Salesforce.com or somebody else where it's actually inside the facility itself. And I think more and more, again, if you're a seller or actually if you're a buyer, right? Whether you're an enterprise buyer or some cloud service provider that is trying to deliver a new set of apps, a lot of the considerations about how you take advantage of this and how you're going to deploy and sell more, frankly, or solve some of these security concerns is really about how you optimize the relationship between the apps and the data and the users and the network. And frankly, that's, again, the self-serving part of the statement is we're watching this happen inside Equinix right now. So I think that's, going back to your point about, we're all in the same ecosystem. And frankly, I think it's kind of all coming together inside our facilities.
That's great. Well, it's kind of speaking of that and the network piece. What about performance? There's obviously performance concerns for every application. How does multi-cloud help that?
One of the biggest things it does is it kind of frees you from being tied to either your own infrastructure that might not be able to perform on an elasticity or scale dimension. You might have legacy components of your application that are monolithic. You might have to solve that with something that a public cloud provider simply cannot build you a big enough box to do. So multi-cloud opens up a way to still preserve and or start investing in those commitments to automation so that you make everything that you're doing repeatable, but still identify or invest in the exact performance infrastructure or performant infrastructure that really solves your critical pain point. And then ideally it gives you the flexibility then evolve beyond that monolithic dependency and make it more broadly, a more cloud-native application so that you're not so constrained. So it really gets you out of the corner.
So one comment I'd make there, and again, cloud is not about the technology, it's about the agility model. So a pretty common use case we see is having a cloud layer or scalable app tier in front of a dedicated set of hardware on the back, which is a great thing you can do with Direct Connect out of Amazon. You can do it with all kinds of network architectures. But what that provides you is putting your massive bare metal for data I/O requirements or massive storage needs that just can't be met yet on public cloud into the same application architecture and put the cloud benefit in the right place, backed by good old iron, is something we see a lot of.
I mean, that's to add to what you said. I mean, I've been doing this. I've been helping clients to kind of hybrid models where we're doing Direct Connect or from the application performance perspective, they have these very high transactional databases that just can't run. I mean, one of the things you can't do in the cloud, on a lot of clouds right now, just from a licensing perspective, is run Oracle racks, right? So there you have to, there's no way I can put my Oracle, I can't just have a single Oracle server sitting somewhere in the cloud. I need to actually have dedicated physical hardware, with enterprise SAN behind it, battery back cache and things like that. So by having that hybrid model, and with Equinix, they have a great presence all over the world. So wherever our clients need to be, we can put them there, and then we can interconnect them with their on-premise cloud stuff backed by their physical hardware.
Yeah, when I hear about performance, so thanks for the plug, by the way. All of you, actually. Thanks for the plugs. When you talk about performance, my current lens, and you've heard me talk about this over the course of the last, 30 minutes or so, has been very sort of end-user oriented. And so this comes down to, what's the end-user experience like, or the user experience? And a lot of the scalable, elastic, flexible infrastructure that's on the back end ultimately is delivering some sort of result or piece of data or intelligence or some sort of an output to a user somewhere. Right? Sometimes it's to another machine, and that's happening more and more. But somewhere along the line, there's a human being consuming some bit of data or trying to create some sort of intelligence out of it. And when you think about the end user as a common denominator there, I come back to something I said earlier, which is, and again, this is my lens du jour, which is network, right? And all the cloud apps that we have on our mobile devices are fabulous, but if I don't have a good network connection, I can't get to my data or my music or whatever it is, right? No matter how scalable Apple's infrastructure is for iTunes, it doesn't matter if I don't have a network connection, right? So I think it's a consideration that's often overlooked, right? Particularly as the the generation of business people and coders and developers are focused on apps and mobility and social, and it's great. There's an incredible amount of innovation. Network engineering just isn't sexy, right? But it's extremely important. And I heard the magic word here earlier, which is interconnect, right? You know, that's part of our business problem. I mean, it's part of our business model is actually interconnecting all these different parties. And so when we talk about the ecosystems, right, it's one thing to have these ecosystems connected over plain old internet. It's another thing to have them actually connected over a, call it an abstraction network, or a private network that bypasses the internet, which completely changes what the network performance is like, and thereby has a massive impact on end user experience.
Yeah, there's some really unsolvable problems here as well. So for example, China. We have a client, Coty Pharmaceuticals, who has brand sites all over the world, and the regulatory requirements are forcing them to launch e-commerce in each geography in every country they operate in. China's a huge market for them, and you know, the great firewall and all this stuff. I mean, it's just set up in a way where performance, no matter how fast your pipes are, is not going to be really good. So then you have to get into things like, okay, I need a license to operate a website in China. Then I need a Datapipe data center in well, I think it's in Shanghai. I forget where it is. And then I need CDN local to the country. So I mean, these issues are not solved, and I think they're unique to your point of every application and the user experience you're trying to really facilitate. But now it's also you know, a demographic issue as well as a geographic one. So
speed of light and geographic and geopolitical constraints will always be there. And you know, there's a lot of companies that make a lot of money off of trying to solve those issues.
So we've talked a lot about different things in the multi-cloud, what goes into it. From an outsider's perspective, it could sound like a lot of pieces and parts. And is this complicating IT, or is this simplifying IT? Which way is this going?
You said it. I'm going to make one quick comment, which is it was on the signboard outside. It's the inevitable future of IT, right? The inevitable multi-cloud. I kind of chuckled when I saw that. It was going to happen, right? This is just like, you know, there's not just one vendor in traditional IT. There's not going to be just one vendor here. And, you know, sure, is it going to be more complex, but that's more complexity is job creation. So I think
you automate it.
These are things that will get, well, somebody's got to do the automation, right? So I think this is inevitable, and you know, these problems may not all get solved, but they will. It's an evolution. It's an evolution.
Yeah, I liked your optimistic perspective on it. When you reflected on the sign out front, this is inevitable. I was going to comment that maybe it's here comes your beating. It is going to make it more complicated. I mean, this is yet another domain to acquire expertise in. Yeah. And the good news is there are returns on that investment, right? The problem is, especially for companies that have been around for more than 5-6 years, is they have a lot of stuff that is not even virtualized. So they have domain investments in bare metal. They have done a lot, hopefully, with virtualization, and now the commitment to automate. So if they're good at image deployment and all that, well, that doesn't translate quite as well in the cloud space. So that's yet another and a bigger step to take to get from virtualization to cloud native. Now there are steps along the way that, again, every time you automate something and make it self-service, that's also important. You can't just have the ticket to go ask for it, somebody else to push the button for you. But if you can get the self-service piece there, then you're beginning to get returns on those investments, right? So that's the light, and that's the hope, and the bright light at the end of the tunnel is there are returns on those investments, and letting you, and talk about job creation too, like thinking about how you structure your organization. So if you're dependent on a lot of domain-specific experts, and you have management at the top, and you have a lot of domain experts here in the middle, and then your operators, you have very few, because you know why you have very few? Because none of those, they don't have the tools to apply themselves and to make repeatable the things that the experts have. And the experts probably feel a little nervous about taking that next step up. They're not always as deep on the development side, so they may not feel strong as somebody who can automate something. And so I've seen it happen in a lot of companies. They get white knuckled on, well, no, I like my blades, I like my imaging server, I like it this way. And they're worried about being replaced in that way. So
yeah, I would add to that. I mean, look, a lot of us have been doing this a long time, and I was an IT ops guy, and there's something about the simplicity that's really appealing. But it's never worked, right? I mean, think about Enterprise Service Bus. Okay, we're going to integrate all 600 apps to make it easier and simpler to use. Well, I mean, that didn't go too well. It's still, a lot of those projects work, but they're still in flight now. So what we talk to enterprises about is your existing IT infrastructure has to be extended to support cloud. You can't just take a cloud model and drop it on top of everything you have because it'll break. And you can't, by the way, take your existing IT model and rely on those same solutions to extend quickly in an agile manner into these cloud models or modes, because you're just going to slow down and not be able to service the needs of the business. So I think, unfortunately, for IT professionals who want simplicity, they're going to be very disappointed in the next 5 years. Fortunately, for those of us who are in this industry and ecosystem to drive business value, make money, build businesses, and innovate models, it's the coolest time in the history of IT for that sort of opportunity.
And just to go back, I mean, to the original question, which is going to be, is it simple or is it complex? So there are tools out there like Rightscale. Rightscale has an awesome product that makes it simple to do this, but like everyone here has said, you just can't take what you guys currently have and just dump it right there and just think it's going to work. You know, there is planning that has to go into it, but there are tools to take a complex thing and make it simple.
Yeah, or make the impossible only difficult, right? I mean, that's maybe a better way to say it, but I agree with you.
Yeah, I think that the commercial insight, or the takeaway that I would leave with is, cloud was inevitable. It was coming, right? But the key factor is that you move things into a network, the internet, right? And you have literally the internet, the interspace net, so interconnected networks. And the internet creates time compression. It changes distribution models, it changes economic models, creates marketplaces, and attracts capital, right? So I think you can expect that in this whole multi-cloud thing is that, again, commercial insight for whoever's in this room, things like marketplace management, brokerage services, load balancing, things like that across all these different clouds. And I think the common theme here has been around management, automation, orchestration, things like that. It's like, how do you bring all this stuff together, weave it together? There's a lot of commercial opportunity there.
Yeah. So I've got a couple more questions. Can we, does anyone have any questions? Is it okay if I do? Do you want to speak into the mic or yell out or? Oh yeah, can you speak into the mic?
Is it on? One thing I haven't heard yet in the multi-cloud discussion is interoperability and cloud portability. So if you think about moving workloads between clouds to enable a true utility compute model, can you speak to how do you move a workload from, say, one private cloud infrastructure to a public cloud infrastructure, maybe pull it back, or move between two different public cloud environments? What are the barriers for interoperability?
A lot of that has to do with the maturity and architecture of the application itself. I'll give you some examples of what it was like to be moving a lot from Amazon to zCloud. It's the same, really. I think most applications can be done in this way. It is certainly nothing like drag and drop, but that's the vision. But you have to think about data gravity is probably the biggest obstacle to overcome. And again, this is disproportionately about applications that were real time, could not go down, that made money, and when they were down, people are screaming at me. So the basic process is you have to get your data in both places, wherever it is now and then the new future home, or if you want it to be in both, you need to be getting it to that second place. The next piece is you need to be able to abstract and ideally have an automated way to cut over and to cut back if there's a failure. You need to have the same mechanics, ideally, for the day-to-day operators of the game who need to affect change. So if there's a failed server, you don't want them to have to know, oh, well, it's in this cloud, so I do it this way. If it's in this cloud, I'd have to read a manual. You want to abstract those differences into something like a multi-cloud orchestration platform so that you have the same interface, it's drop-downs, it's parameterized, it's you're giving them the capability to use tools in a consistent way regardless of where it is. But once you have that data in both places and you can affect a cutover, then you have the ability to kind of pivot. But again, as IT and operations people, we're all in a heavily audited and change management oriented environment. So you're not going to be just doing this willy-nilly. Most of the application migration projects I've seen take a number of weeks, right? If you can truly get to multi-cloud, your software architecture really doesn't care about differences in performance and can self-heal and replace failed components. Think of the Netflix being a great model citizen of cloud utopian, cloud native types of architectures. If you can truly get it there, then you're federated and you should be able to affect a lot of change more autonomously, but that takes years.
Yeah, so we get this question a lot, and I think our early innovation in the space was the server template construct, and Zynga used it to some extent, where you separate the base operating system from the application or the persona of the server that's running. You keep the data, to your point, in the locations it needs to reside in, but it's kind of a separation of concerns environment. So you can launch on Azure or Windows OS, you can launch it on Amazon. Once it's launched, it becomes the same exactly configured SQL Server, for example, and it attaches to the data, and all that's abstracted away from the application. The code runs, it doesn't even know the difference. And so what happens is you have a spectrum here. One is, and there's a couple companies that I think started up around the concept of, let me take this VM and transform it into an AMI and run it on Amazon. And I think there's in my opinion, there's a small subset, 10% or less, of the applications that exist in the enterprise that will fit that profile. So there's a need for tools, from the simplest app that you can VM bit level copy to another infrastructure, to the most complex backend system that's tied into all your ERP components and your invoicing that might take years to really re-architect to a point where you could get portability. And the main business driver there is going to be DR, for example. There's very few reasons to move some of those apps from a business model perspective. If you don't want to run a data center, go to Equinix, right? I mean, there's some easier answers than re-architecting the whole thing over the next 3 years. One thing I would mention that we've seen a lot of recently is containers. So Docker, they did their conference last week. There's a huge amount of interest in what that provides. We're big believers in what it can do. From my standpoint, it's just making something we solved for 5 years ago much easier. And the less we have to do with that, the more we can worry about core business issues, the better. So it's watch that space, but also beware if someone says they have a magic wand, because I've not seen one.
Yeah, I agree with you on the magic wand. I mean, the magic wand's great for kind of monolithic single node or single server applications. Sure, they are quite portable because they don't depend on that, the rest of the set of servers moving along with them. That's where iterations around testing and making sure that you've instrumented all of that automation again and understand the performance differences between two different infrastructures. But yeah, I agree. Lift and shift is of limited applicability if you have large applications.
I think the only comment that I would throw in is, and you can tell who the network guy is, right, is that you also have to, there's everything that's been talked about at the workload management and the application and data layer, and then you have to give consideration, because it is cloud, and just by default network is involved, is moving between these clouds, both on a one-time basis and an ongoing basis. I mean, the ultimate dream here is being able to load balance evenly between, or shift seamlessly between any set of cloud providers. That's a dream that's far away. And again, shameless self-plug here. About a few weeks ago, you probably saw we announced a new product line, which is indicative of the future of our company, called the Cloud Exchange. And it's the next generation of switch inside the data center that allows for a consumer or an enterprise to actually do multi-cloud management at the network layer, being able to move data between multiple cloud providers on a single switch without having to have private connections or actually having to use the internet to do that. And it actually is, it's a game changer, but again, like I said, network engineering is not very sexy, so it's actually at a very, very low level, but it actually has a very, very fundamental impact to the utilization of multi-cloud and to your question of how do you move things back and forth across different platforms.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So it's 3 o'clock now. If it's okay, we're going to go till 5. If that's okay with everyone. We've got a lot more questions. So I don't want to keep this going, but if you do have more questions, we'll stay here if you want to come talk to us. And there's folks, if you want to talk to Equinix, raise your hands. People that are here from Equinix, people here from Datapipe, some folks here, Redapt, and Rightscale. Yeah, so thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone coming here and participating in this. We're going to do some networking now, and feel free to ask questions and get to know everyone. So thank you. I want to thank the panelists. You guys did great.
That was good. me up. And you? That was good stuff. Really good insights. Actually, I'm a side beneficiary of all this kind of thinking about some of the stuff, especially on data gravity. You know, we've been talking about it earlier, but I think I had an aha moment. You know, when you guys think about it. Yeah, Mark wrote. Hey, because call that. All right, so I'm with the radio. I actually have to get into a meeting. Okay, no problem. Absolutely. I'm to make sure that I ping you. Yep. Yeah, and I've got a local guy here too.
Nice job. I used to have Rob change.
Yeah.
How's Redapt?
Very simple. It's just my first name. The only one.
Hey, it's not cost.
I us.
Cost. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it has changed. I think we met a while back.
Please. Okay. Happy to help. Hi. Hi, Fiona. Very nice to meet you. Okay, good. Okay. We are. We're just south of the airport. Okay.
job. Appreciate it. Hey, you guys really flowed. Need a whole lot of
Encouragement,
a whole lot of
yeah.
encouragement.
You know, it's actually too bad because I thought we were on a good roll. I think we were doing 4 types of questions, but that one question was actually good.
Well, we could have spread it tonight. You know, sometimes leave them wanting more. Dropping a good philosophy.
Well, plus if you look at each of the panelists, they've all been bombarded by like 4 or 5 people, so that's a good sign.
Yeah.
That's a good sign.
Yeah, and hey, the bar's open, right? So it's not like we're done.
Oh, seriously, yeah. Oh man, I was fading in there for a little while, just before it started. So you're based here, right?
I am.
How long have you been with me?
5 years.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I had a big company before. It's called Players. It's all VMware and
Cool. I believe what we were talking about. It's a good time to be in this space right now. But the challenge that I feel is you know, it is getting fairly fragmented. Like you have like this set of ginormous players, not just in typical AWS, you just have like a big set of companies that are developing software for Oracle, IBM, et cetera. And then the long tail.
I just keep it. I'm sorry. Presenting, I'm Michael.
South of here. It's in the city.
And now the places that I grew up, I can afford to live down there because, you know,
You guys are right next door to Oracle. We are, like, the land is publicly owned by yeah.
so Ellison flies this jet in and out of the Columbus Airport.
Literally right there. We are right on the
You seem to have the big picture, you know, the real big picture of technology.
Yeah, I don't just email me.
The one that nobody really talks about.
Yeah. Nothing works. Nothing goes without the network. The network to me is actually creating but yeah, that's my answer. The network piece of this is frankly because now everything is somewhere else. This probably goes to my personal everything. Think about it. I know what the internet is. It's my phone line, my internet line, my TV line, my home security system, my restaurant controls, everything is now. I'm well, we need to bring more data. This guy said the right name. It's all around you. That's it.
Well, I appreciate you flying in to do this.
Yeah, you will. Yeah. No. I just want to make sure it's okay because, you know, flying around crap.
So we're gonna get started in the bar area. That sounds like more fun, doesn't it? So they're gonna start cleaning up in here as you head out. Excuse me, as you head out, there should be a really nice lady with a purple envelope that has some treats in it that you might want to utilize in the bar area, if you're catching what I'm putting down.